Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. Look at us hopping back across the pond today. We're here to meet a nice retired couple named Derek and Eileen Severs. Derek and Eileen were residents of a small town called Hambleton, which is in the North Yorkshire part of England. Derek had retired after many years as a businessman, and Eileen enjoyed spending time volunteering in Hambleton, where they had lived for the past 20 years. There, they enjoyed the town's many lakes, woods, and hiking trails. It was a beautiful, scenic area where they really enjoyed spending time together. Both Eileen and Derek were very well liked by their neighbors, many of whom were retirees as well. Derek was known to enjoy horse racing, as well as spending time with his friends at one of the many local pubs. Eileen was a much-loved member of the community and was known for her big heart. She was a regular volunteer for many of the local charities in the area. She always put others first and found joy in giving and doing for others. She had even gone on to receive an MBE in 1989 for her charity work. On the afternoon of November 13th, 1993, Eileen was at church, helping with a charity bazaar that she had helped organize. Around midday, as she was finishing up, she told friends at the church that she was heading home. At the same time, Derek was at a local pub called the Finch's Arms Pub, having a late lunch with some friends. He left at around 3:30 that afternoon to make his way home. This was unfortunately the last time Eileen and Derek would be seen. The following week, both Derek and Eileen had missed meetings with friends, as well as several scheduled appointments. They were both the type of people to always keep to their schedule. It was very unlike them to be late to a function, let alone miss it altogether. This concerned several of their friends to the point that they called police. This was a small enough town that everyone really knew everyone, and one would take notice if they didn't see someone they were used to seeing around town for several days. After police were called, they immediately made their way to Derek and Eileen's home. When police knocked on the door, they were met by Derek and Eileen's son, Roger. Roger was 37 years old and somewhat estranged from his parents, although he was living at home with them at the time. Roger, for whatever reason, had difficulty holding down jobs and staying in relationships. His favorite way to occupy his time was drinking at the bar with his friends. His parents had let him move back home with them after his last relationship had gone sour. When police had told Roger they had gotten calls from his parents' friends expressing concerns about their welfare, Roger had dismissed their concerns and said that his parents had gone on vacation and had been in London for the past few days. Police then asked Roger if they could come in and have a look around just to see if everything was in order. It seemed very odd that they would take a vacation and not tell any one of their friends, and very strange and out of character for them to go out of town when they both had scheduled appointments and didn't even call to cancel. Roger then welcomed them in, no problem, but they found nothing out of the ordinary. During a later press conference, the lead detective said there was no evidence of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, and really, nothing out of the ordinary. This wasn't convincing to the Severs friends. They felt something was not right here. Eileen's friends remember that when the couple had gone away in the past, she would always call them first to tell them that they would be going away and to ask if they would keep an eye on the house. This time, not one single phone call. And Derek would always ask their next-door neighbor, a man named Doug Clements, to look after their garden when they went away. Again, not one phone call. When their friends had found out that they had apparently left their son Roger in charge of house sitting, they immediately knew something was off. Roger was not on the best of terms with his parents. He had worked a series of jobs, including being a bartender, a crop sprayer, and at one point an ironmonger, and he was once again unemployed from one of these endeavors, and his parents had found out that the woman he was previously with was pregnant, and he had no intention of having anything to do with her or his child. Eileen had always wanted grandchildren, and thankfully she was able to have a relationship with her grandson for several years. They had later come to realize that Roger was a pathological liar and a serial cheater, and started to be known around town as a con man. This was very embarrassing to his parents, as you can imagine. After Derek and Eileen's friends had expressed their concerns to police that there was no way the Severs would have left their son Roger in charge, they decided to take a closer look at the home. This time they returned in the daytime and noticed things that they weren't able to see when they initially investigated. They found a part of the garden where the area had been dug up, as well as signs of a fire in the garden. After finding things amiss in the property around the house, police were eager to take another look inside. They felt there might have been something they missed the first time around. Police also went to the train station that Roger had said his parents had left from and asked the station employees if they had seen either of the Severs, and no one at the train station had recalled seeing either one of them. According to police, there was no evidence that they had made it to London either. No ticket, no traveler's manifest, nothing. After being missing for a week, several local newspapers had begun reporting on Derek and Eileen's mysterious disappearance. Police then decided to revisit the Severs' home a third time in order to conduct a forensic search for blood, as they were definitely suspecting foul play. I think we all are. Sure enough, detectives did find at the edge of the bathtub several suspicious, tiny, dark stains. Upon testing, these stains were confirmed to be blood. It is worth noting that just detecting the presence of blood doesn't necessarily mean something nefarious has happened. It just means the presence of blood was detected. It could have come from a paper cut that someone had tried to clean, and maybe a little drop landed on the edge of the tub. We don't know. Also, because the amount found was so small, this didn't appear to be the scene of a violent crime, but again, we don't know. While looking in the family's garage, investigators found several small stains on the garage's door, and upon testing, was determined to be blood spatter. Police also found what appeared to be a blood smear in the back seat of Derek's car. In the trunk of Derek's car, there were also several small green fibers found, as well as a pair of pants that they had confirmed as belonging to Roger. The pants were also speckled with the green fibers. This was peculiar since there was no indication that Roger was known to drive around in his father's car. Could he have been taking advantage of a situation with his father being out of town to go for a joyride? Very possibly. When examining the interior of the Severs home, investigators found the same green fibers as they had found in Derek's trunk. Although found in these places, police were unable to determine the origin source of these fibers, since they couldn't find anything in the house that they could have logically come from. There was, however, an indication that the fibers had come from something that was possibly removed, such as a towel or blanket, that was at one point in the house. This was somewhat of a speculation at this point, since they didn't know what the item actually was, but had decided that whatever it was missing. So yeah, there's that. Very helpful. Whatever it was, investigators were confident that it was part of the crime scene. They also believed that Roger wasn't being all that truthful about his lack of knowledge of his parents' whereabouts. Based on Roger's reputation around town, they knew that if he knew something, they'd get a tall tale on top of it. They felt that there was more to the story, including the possibility of foul play. Was Roger responsible in any way for his parents' sudden disappearance? Police were keeping their suspicions quiet at this point, since there was no explicit proof that a crime had been committed. In addition, there was no physical evidence. They had a few blood droplets here and there, but nowhere near the amount that would have concluded to a devastating event. They also had the mysterious green fibers, but again, they may or may not have anything to do with the situation at hand. Although Derek and Eileen were missing, they were still presumed to be alive. After all, the police had no evidence pointing otherwise. Police began searching in the Severs' backyard, since they had found evidence from their previous visit that there had been some level of excavation done in the garden, as well as the evidence of a fire. They were hoping that some type of evidence would point them in the right direction. While digging through the dirt and ash, no evidence of human remains were found. They did, however, find small pieces of clothing and carpeting. Because of how small, this, again, didn't necessarily mean something sinister had happened. They widened their search as the area was so vast in lush forests and wetlands that finding a body was equivalent to finding a needle in a haystack. The whole surrounding area was one huge hiding place. After days and days of searching the vast area, unfortunately, no clues emerged. That was until police got a break. They heard about an instance from another police officer that had happened before Derek and Eileen were even reported missing. The police officer said he remembered seeing a man in an isolated part of the woods. He said that when he asked the man what he was doing in the woods, he said he was just relieving himself. The officer told him that when he was finished, to be on his way. The man agreed, and the officer left. He recalls the man as acting very suspicious and felt something was slightly off about him. When asked to describe the man, he gave several identifying characteristics that matched Roger. This worried investigators and after hearing about this occurrence, they immediately made their way to this patch of woods to investigate. Once there, they found what appeared to be a bloody towel in the area where the officer remembered seeing the man. Thinking as though they may have stumbled into the crime scene, the police began combing this area, but did not turn up anything more than this single bloody towel. This towel, however, did match towels they remembered seeing at the Severs home. As concerning as this find was, there was no way to tell who the blood on the towel belonged to, since investigators didn't have a sample of either Derek or Eileen. I found no indication that a blood sample of Rogers was taken to test against the bloody towel. I don't know why. Any judge would have granted this. Anyway, moving on. A few days later, one of the investigators was going through photos taken at the Severs home. In particular, the ones taken in the garage and of Derek's car. As he was looking through them, he noticed something suspicious. He saw in the car's wheel well an unusual buildup of mud. He said the color and the texture of the mud itself looked strange, and that you really wouldn't see this type and amount with regular road usage. You have to consider the area that they are in and the regular use of the car in particular, and neither was consistent with what he saw in the photos. He explained that heavy driving and road usage would have produced a much darker gray, almost black color. What he found on the car was a much lighter brown. He was thinking that it couldn't have come from the same place. He thought that the key to the case was finding out where exactly this type of mud had come from. He knew as much that it certainly didn't come from around Hambleton. A geologist named Dr. Tony Brown was then called in to examine the soil, dirt, and pebbles found and run tests to determine their origin location. While searching, he also found bits of grass as well as other debris that he thought might be helpful. Of the plant material, he found small pieces of moss that he determined could have only come from a shaded woodland area. He also found what appeared to be a small piece of fishing wire and discovered 20 types of pollen mixed in with the mud and was able to identify almost all of them. Most species were from oak, elm, and hawthorn trees, but one type of pollen baffled him. He had never seen this type before and had no idea where it came from. Side note, my dad is a micropaleontologist and wrote a book on pollen spores, so I am very excited to see where the pollen will take us. After studying the unknown pollen under the microscope, he then sifted through thousands of pictures of different types of pollen, hoping to come across it. After going through pages and pages and looking at sample after sample, a process that seemed to go on forever, he finally found a match. It turns out that this pollen was from a tree that is relatively uncommon to England. This was peculiar, as in the grand scheme of things, the UK is relatively small, and an island. This pollen was found jammed up in the wheel well of a car, so it would have had to have come from somewhere nearby, and being on the rare side, hopefully would not be so difficult to track down. It was actually from a tree called a horse chestnut tree, and this tree in particular is native to Asia. It was noted that the horse chestnut tree pollen was a heavier pollen, meaning it wouldn't be able to travel through the air as other pollen spores would, as its density would have weighed it down. This indicated that the pollen spores would have fallen straight down after falling off the tree itself and landing very close to the base of the tree, as opposed to falling off the tree and floating through the air, traveling sometimes hundreds of feet, landing nowhere near the tree it fell off of. After determining that all 4 of the car's wheel wells had evidence of pollen particles from the horse chestnut tree, it was apparent that the car had been most likely parked near or right under a horse chestnut tree. There would be very little chance that these pollen spores would have made their way to somewhere other than the base of the tree they fell off of, and would have been lodged in all 4 wheel wells of a car. Because of the rarity of the horse chestnut tree, identifying where these trees were would have given police the strongest lead at this point. The car would have definitely had to have been parked in the presence of one of these trees. Dr. Brown was able to identify 5 possible locations where horse chestnut trees were and where the Severs car might have been parked. Investigators spent the next day searching a wooded area relatively close to the Severs home, but this ended up not turning up anything. They then searched another wooded area, this one near a lake, which was a much larger area than the first location. They felt this area was promising, since being by a lake, this would have given reason for that small piece of fishing wire to be found, mixed in with the mud from the car's wheel well, as Dr. Brown had previously identified. Police then organized a search team to work their way from the top of the hill to the bottom. The team made their way down and carefully poked at piles of leaves and marsh, making sure not to leave anything unchecked. One of the officers had poked at a pile of leaves, and whatever was underneath felt to be unusually soft. He carefully cleared away the leaves to reveal what appeared to be human skin. From there, police began clearing away at the pile and found the remains of Derek and Eileen Severs wrapped in a green blanket. The Severs were found just a few feet away from a horse chestnut tree. Investigators were able to compare the green blanket they were wrapped in to the green fibers found in their home days earlier, and they were a match. The soil particles found on top of Derek and Eileen match that of the soil found in the area where the police officer had placed Roger Severs when he came upon him in the woods, and other particles match the soil found in the Severs garden. There was also tile found to lay the frame for the burial spot that was found to be the same tile found at the Severs home. As they were found, both Derek and Eileen's cause of death appeared to have been blunt force trauma to the head, as there was evidence that Derek was struck at least 10 times and Eileen at least 8 times to the sides and back of their heads with a heavy object, something like a hammer. The only suspect police had at this time was Roger. Because the green fibers found on the pants belonging to Roger match the green blanket that his parents were found wrapped in, police were confident of his responsibility and involvement. At the time, Roger was in severe debt, and it was presumed that Roger had returned to his parents' home after spending the day drinking at the bar with his friends and possibly asked for help, financial or otherwise. Most likely financial. Roger was used to getting what he wanted and was expecting to leave the house with money in hand. We can assume that if this did happen, he was refused, as Roger continued to be plagued with debt. It is believed that Roger went to his parents' home on November 13th, meeting his mother as she had just returned home from the church. They might have gotten into an argument about Roger's debt, and Eileen said she couldn't help him this time. During their argument, it is believed that Eileen went to the bathroom, and while there, Roger followed her and struck her in the head, causing her to fall to the floor, leaving the small spatters of blood on the bathtub and tile. The blows to her head didn't kill her instantly, as the autopsy report had shown that she possibly lived up to 30 minutes after the attack. Possibly panicking at this point, Roger went to his parents' bedroom, took the blanket off the bed, and wrapped his mother in it. It was the same green blanket whose fibers would later be found on Roger's pants. After being wrapped in the blanket, Roger then dragged his mother to the kitchen, placing her up against the cabinets. He then attacked his father in the driveway, hitting him in the head, causing him to hit the garage door, which we know he came in contact with, as the police found microspatter evidence here. He then placed his father in the back seat of his car, went back inside to the kitchen, and carried his mother out, placing her in the trunk. He then drove his father's car to what he thought was a secluded location and parked. He carried his mother and father out of the car and proceeded to drag them further into the woods, into a shallow ravine. He then covered them with pieces of tile from his parents' home and scattered leaves on top of them. He then ran out of the woods and drove away quickly, all the way back to his parents' home, and put his father's car back in the garage. Roger was arrested on suspicion of his parents' murder, and the trial began at Nottingham Crown Court on November 21st, 1994. Roger actually admitted to killing his parents and taking and hiding his parents' bodies in the woods, but had denied murder on grounds of diminished responsibility. Then the story unfolded. The prosecutor went on to describe how Roger was quite unlike his parents, who had been decent, hardworking people. He talked about Roger never having a proper job and a string of failed relationships. He continually portrayed himself as successful to people around town, but this was all a facade. There had been an instance where Derek had loaned a friend £10,000 for an investment, and Roger had found out about this and was jealous. Roger was always sponging money off of his parents and had wanted to buy a pub for himself. No business plan, no numbers, just wanted to buy a place to hang out with his friends and drink. This was particularly upsetting to him to find out that his father had lent someone else money, but in this one instance, wouldn't give him anything. While describing the attack on Eileen, the prosecutor said, "The blows were hard and fractured her skull. She was hit as she lay on the floor, and there was no sign that she tried to defend herself. There was a great deal of blood." He then went on to describe how Roger wrapped his parents in the blanket he took from their home, which left fibers all over the place, and after burying his parents, had scattered leaves and moss overtop the shallow grave to make it look natural. During his 11 police interviews, it was said he told lie upon lie. Roger took the witness stand to testify on his own behalf. He said that on November 13th, the day of the killings, he had been cooking a steak using a heavy steak mallet. It was then that he had gotten into an argument with his mother about his ex-girlfriend. He led her to believe there would be a possible reconciliation, but really, he had no intention of this. Eileen then walked to the bathroom to run a bath, and Roger followed her there, and they continued to argue. His father had returned from the pub and had apparently made a disparaging remark about his ex-girlfriend. Roger said, "His comments were not very pleasant about her or myself. I still loved the woman and didn't like the comments being made about her." Roger then reminded his father about his son, Derek's grandchild, but Derek was not as enthusiastic as I had hoped, and I felt disappointed and upset. I thought they were both being unfair to me. He was essentially just using his son as an excuse to get money, knowing he himself didn't have a relationship with him, just being very self-centered and using everything in his arsenal to get what he wanted. Roger said his mother continued to make disparaging comments about the whole situation, and all he remembers is striking her with the mallet. He said he couldn't say how many times, and that it all happened very fast. He said he didn't follow his mother into the bathroom with the intention of hitting her. He said, "I don't think I was in control. I wasn't clear about what was going on. I felt very cold. I was sweating. I can't describe it. It was panic, I think." He claimed he struck his mother in the bathroom while his father was in another part of the house. Roger then went outside and was followed by Derek, who asked him what was going on. Roger said he lashed out and went straight past him. He said, "I hardly have any recollection of what happened. It was a cold night, and a cold seemed to start bringing my senses around." He continued, "I recall I had a whiskey bottle and drank a substantial quantity. I did not realize what I had hit my father with or how many times I had hit him. He paced around outside for a while and then went and sat in the backyard greenhouse. I guess he was in some state of shock, and when he had eventually come to his senses, he went back into the house to see what he did. He said when he had walked back in, he couldn't believe what he had done. He said his first thought was to call his ex-girlfriend, but didn't. He said, "At some stage, I passed out." While being cross-examined, Roger did confess to being a con man for many years, as well as agreeing to being an excellent liar. He actually told his ex-girlfriend, the mother of his child, that he was a gynecologist. I don't know how far he thought this lie could go, and how he was able to convince her that he was a doctor, but never seemed to go into work and never had any money. Anyway, Roger had told how his mother had allegedly called him a pathological liar in front of a psychiatrist after he had taken an overdose of tablets earlier in 1993. On the third day of his trial, his ex-girlfriend took the stand. She said Roger had gotten into a fight with her just hours before he killed his parents. But 2 days later, he was acting incredibly calm. He then showed up to her house with roses and took her to dinner and asked her to marry him. Okay, wow. Prior to all of this, they had actually spent 3 years together before breaking up, and she went on to tell about their tumultuous ups and downs and how she had been subjected to emotional abuse, lies, and deceit. She said he was also responsible for her 4 children being put on a social services at-risk list, and she knew she had to throw him out. She had claimed that Roger had duped her in the relationship by claiming to be a doctor and stringing her along with promises he knew full well he couldn't keep. While with her, he would constantly criticize his mother, saying she had never supported him enough. The night before the murders, he had called her pleading to get back together, but she obviously didn't want that, knowing what she had gone through in the past, and ended the phone call by hanging up on him. A psychologist named Dr. Peter Wood, who had observed Roger in prison, was called as a witness for the defense. He had described Roger as an inadequate psychopath, self-centered, unreliable, untrustworthy, and at times boastful and grandiose. It is believed Eileen and Derek gave Roger an ultimatum. They had refused to give him any more money until he remended the relationship with his son's mother. If he didn't, they threatened to cut him out of their will and leave everything to their grandson. And instead of making any attempt to patch things up, Roger had a meltdown and began to emotionally blackmail them. He staged a drug overdose under the guise of a suicide attempt, in which he left a note basically saying his mother would rather help anyone over him, which obviously was not true. They went above and beyond to help him in every aspect of his life, including putting him through private school, paying for his expensive flat, and paying several of his debts that he had racked up over the years. One of his former girlfriends said Roger could have had it all on a plate if he only wanted to work for it. But he was motivated by jealousy and greed. He had been given everything on a plate, but it still wasn't enough. I hate him now. He was the most successful con man and most brilliant liar you could ever meet. She spoke very highly of Roger's mother Eileen, saying, "She was the best thing that had ever happened in my life. She rang me almost every day. She was a wonderful and lovely lady, and I shall miss her dearly." She said about Roger, "No one would believe the sexual and psychological torture I had to endure at the hands of that man. What he did to me has scarred me mentally forever. Because of his various thefts, we were in danger of losing our home." Roger Severs was charged with the murder of both of his parents, and near the end of the trial, tearfully confessed on the witness stand. On December 6th, 1994, the jury took less than 2 hours to find Roger Severs guilty of murdering his parents. He was given 2 life sentences in prison. After the sentencing, A close friend of the family said Derek had told him, "We have spent thousands of pounds over the years rescuing Roger from his problems, and we have had enough." While in prison, Roger had written to another woman expressing that he was pleased by the turnout at his parents' funeral and said he was missing them terribly. In that same letter, he had complained about multiple aspects of prison. A detective involved in the case said, "He never showed any remorse for what he did. He is an evil man." Roger was actually released in 2014. However, he ended up back in prison after breaching the terms of his license conditions. License conditions are essentially parole rules or the parole conditions equivalent in the UK. At this time, the parole board has refused to share details for his return to prison. As far as I was able to find, Roger is still in prison and likely to remain there for a long, long time. Just incredibly sad, needless, and fueled by greed. Let me know what you think about this one. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.